Okay, so we're getting ready to start our next project in Photoshop. Most likely will be our last project because we just drug our feet way too much on the digital divorce. Um, what we're going to work on is we're going to create a vintage concert poster. This will give us an opportunity to mess with layer effects, with things like um, uh, capturing the look of a certain era, color manipulation, um, lots of type, and how type can be manipulated in Photoshop, as well as things like gradient maps, gradient overlays, um, blending modes that allow us to make it look aged and what have you. So I've got several decades pulled up here. So I'm going to start here looking at the 1950s. The first thing we got to do is kind of figure out what were the styles of the different periods of concert posters. Now, what the assignment will be is you will take a modern act, an act that's only been around maybe 10 or 15 years, tops, and you're going to create a concert poster for that act, whether it's a solo artist or a band, and you're going to create a concert poster as if it was a certain decade or a certain time period in history. So if Metallica was around in the 1950s, I want to see a 1950s Metallica poster. What would that look like? Well, let's look at some 50s posters. Now, the 50s was the late 40s, and throughout the 50s was the real beginnings of, well, leaving the big band era and going into rock and roll. Okay? Rock and roll came about in 1955, 1956, but there were also country music, the Grand Ole Opry out of Nashville, and things like that. And what a lot of album promoters would do when they figured out how to do live music with amplifiers. In the old days, it was a big band. You didn't need amplifiers. You had large amounts of instrumentation that would project into a large auditorium, so it was no big deal. But when rock and roll hit, it became a big thing for record labels to send out what they would call their stable of artists, as if they had a whole list of different people that worked for them. So you would see things like this poster here, showcasing, a headliner like Fats Domino and his orchestra, Clyde McPhatter. These were some famous, and then you get your less, known, your doo-wop groups. Look how small Chuck Berry's face is compared to Fats Domino. He just really hit big, and so if you look here, it's got two shows, one at 3:30 in the afternoon and one at 8 p.m. And it was for one day, so it was much like similar to the festivals we have nowadays. Again, but you could see the difference in style. This one it was a full four color, magenta, cyan, yellow, black, printed on, cardstock, heavy duty cardboard, and, various, lots of different types of fonts, but you can see they're very playful, fun. There's a mix of them. Graphic elements like the circles and the stars and the rectangles, all broken up in a lot of different situations. And you can see this is in 1957, the biggest show of stars for 57. So Super Attractions presents, this was back when promotional things were first getting started. Tickets were on sale at Walgreens, so very early, like before Ticketmaster and all that. In this one, you see this nice 1950s font, a mix of script font with block font, sans serif, no markers. But again, this one is just a two color, blue, red. That was it. And, these old black and white photos were just printed in these circles. You could see the registration kind of messed up a little bit. And then you see the age on the paper, which we're going to talk about a little bit later when I start the actual demo. Cape Girardeau, Missouri, believe it or not, Elvis Presley. So this is very early. You can see that one of the biggest concert guys was Fats Domino. He was the hottest thing in rock and roll for a little while before Elvis. Bill Haley and the Comets. But you see, some of these are only one or two color. Two color at least, this one, green and red and black. To make it stand out. Very specific design. Little cutouts. Okay. As we go down through, you can begin to see the similarities. This poster, if you actually owned it, would be worth millions of dollars, probably not millions, but at least $1 million, because this was the concert that Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper were headed to when they died in the plane crash in 1959. You can see too, they call, race music. A lot of, black artists and white artists were not put together on the same spread or the same ticket. But you can see as you look at this grouping here of 1950s concert posters, that there's a lot of similarities in how they're done and handled and laid out. As we go down, and now as you Google these things, you do have to be careful of something like this popping up. DJ Easy Ed, this is not a 50s poster. This is, sponsored by Budweiser and all that. So you have to know what you're looking for. You have to look for specific vintage 50s. Now here's one that's interesting. They kind of did it a little bit like the 50s. The White Stripes, where they use this old clip art of these 50s illustrations. Hey Kids, fun, music, dancing, the White Stripes. Now, it's not aged in any way, but a lot of the way the graphics are handled, very 50s, okay? It's a little too modern for our tastes, if we want to go totally true to what we're looking for. Color limitations were important because, these cost money. Here we have one for Johnny Cash. So this was, I don't have a date on this, but this is probably late 50s. So if you decide to do like a grouping like this one here, where it's almost a festival, similar to Lollapalooza or Coachella or something like that, then you're going to need to choose your images wisely. You have to do it in terms of hierarchy. Most important acts at the top, less and less and smaller as it goes. Now, if you're doing a single group or a single person, let's say like Bill Haley and the Comets, they were the main band, and it says plus Eddie Grady. Well, he was a popular singer at the time, but this was the opening act. This was the big show here. A lot of times they would list their title tracks, their famous songs. So like this one is just an ad for an an album. This isn't even a concert ad. A two-sided smash. Well, what that means is in the old days of record albums, they had something called a 45. Your larger records that you see in the stores today that vinyl's making a comeback are 33 revolutions per minute. And those were LP or long players. 45s were considered singles, and there was one song on one side and one song on the other. Usually there was a hot song on the front and what they call, you hear B-sides a lot. Well, that's where it got the name, was flipping the record over for the B-side. So these would be hung in record stores. Jerry Lee Lewis, Bob Willis, and the Playboys. He's got his crew here, but he's got the big thing. And then there's this nice illustration, and coming out with from Decca Records. Fonts are important. Color choices are important. So as we go along here in the 50s, you will see lots of different things. Now, here is funny. This was an old circus ad. The Wall of Death, the motorcycle going around the bend. So this was for a fair. So you can see the similarities between a county fair or a traveling circus and your concert posters. They were all kind of seen in the same vein as, just completely outlandish. Here we have one, the Fall Preview, New York Magazine. They tried to kind of do a 50s layout for their cover, talking about new movies coming up, Jay-Z, different albums that are coming up, TV, Broadway, television, and they're doing it in the style of one of these old 50s mags. Not super successful, but the idea was there. So this is the 1950s. This, however, is not. And you should be able to tell as you're looking through these, like, this is not the 50s Elvis. This is the 50s Elvis. And I think this is actually a remake. It looks like to me, because everything's super clean and it's on pure white. Now, as we go forward in the